Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1958 horror film, The Blob. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Jonathan for requesting this review and for sending me the film on Blu-ray. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. And I also have a few other options like Patreon in case PayPal doesn't work for you. And that will be featured in the video description as well. So just feel free to take one of those options and I will get to the request as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Blob is a film that has definitely got a cult following over the years. It did pretty well when it came out in the box office. It actually made a pretty considerable profit, but critics were not necessarily as enamored with it. And a lot of the criticisms that the film got upon its release, I still feel are very relevant and very prevalent today. Because it's one of those movies where I'm not a significant fan of. Like, it's a film that I appreciate it for its concept and the idea of it. I just don't think the execution is necessarily that great. And it's from an era of filmmaking that I'm not really that fond of in general. I'm not a super big fan of 50s films. Uh, but there are some exceptions. And even though I do have issues with this movie, I still can say that I had some fun with it as a B movie, because that's really what The Blob is. It's a B movie. It's very much a B movie in its execution, its size, its scope, and so on. And there's some B movie fun to definitely be had with this one. Now, it's directed by a guy named Irvin Yeaworth, and prior to The Blob, he did like a film called The Flaming Teenage. I think it was just a movie about a juvenile delinquent, super low budget film. The Blob is definitely his most well known film. After The Blob, he did a film called 4D Man. He also did Dinosaurus in 1960. But The Blob is his biggest contribution to cinema or to the genre of horror. And his direction, it's not what I would call incredible, but it's good. It's fine for what this film is. I think the direction works. There are some shots that I feel are genuinely great. Other shots, not so much. And there are other bits of direction that are just kind of flat. But when it comes to showcasing the blob, showing the organism from outer space, and it's squelching around, and it's squeezing itself through vents and corners, I feel the film does a good job directing those scenes when it comes to the director and his point of view and what he had in mind for it. And the movie theater sequence in particular is a really well shot scene, especially the run out sequence when all the patrons run out of the theater screaming. And there are some other shots in the film that I also thought were pretty good, like the sequences in the clinic where the old man is taken there after he was exposed to the blob, and the first time you see the blob in its full form as it's sliding and squirming around on the floor, and the scene where you briefly see it all over the doctor as Steve is looking into the window. And there are some moments in the film that are effectively gruesome and kind of grisly, especially for a film from around this time period. In fact, there was a scene cut from the film because it was considered to be too grisly. There was going to be an extra scene where the doctor is eaten by the blob, but they cut that down because they felt it would be too intense for viewers at the time. And it's a film that, if you judge it by today's standards for horror, it's rather tame. But if you look at it in comparison to a lot of other horror films from this time, at least in the United States, it's not tame at all. It's actually quite intense, and definitely something that I can absolutely see giving, kids or adults nightmares back in the 50s if they happen to see it back then, because there really wasn't anything else like it. And just the idea of this alien organism from outer space and how it could just attach itself to you and then eat you alive, that's pretty horrifying. And I think the direction, when it comes to the scenes with the blob, I think it shines. When it comes to the sequences that just deal with the teenagers being teenagers, doing drag racing, or other scenes involving other characters, like the scenes at the police station with the police, or the stuff involving the teenagers' parents, not so much. In fact, I think the film is rather flat, rather uninspired looking when it comes to those scenes. But when it comes to the other stuff, yeah, it's a well shot a film. It's a good looking creature feature. Now, the script by Kay Lineker and Theodore Simonson, it's one of those things where it's similar to the direction, where when it comes to the scenes involving the blob, where it's up front and center, the film is enjoyable, it's fun to watch. When it comes to the other sequences that involve the teens or the police or the parents, not so much. And I didn't even necessarily feel the stuff with the two leads in terms of their romance, or the moments with the two of them being a couple was honestly that strong either, between Steve and Jane. I get what they're trying to do with, like, Lieutenant Dave Barton and the Sergeant Jim Burt and so on, and the cops, and this whole stuff about how, oh, they don't believe anything that Steve and his girlfriend are saying about the blob. But the script just takes way too much of the story and devotes it to the skeptics, the people who are questioning that the blob is real and waiting for more evidence, and jumping to conclusions that aren't necessarily at all close to reality. Like, the kids just set up an elaborate prank when it comes to what happened in the doctor's office. And it just gets to the point where the film becomes very plodding and very slow and dull, because so much of the story is devoted to these elements that aren't really that fun or aren't really that interesting. I don't really care about the drama with Steve and his girlfriend, and specifically their parents, and how they're upset at the two teenagers and think that they're getting involved in some sort of delinquency. I don't give a crap about that. That doesn't matter to me. That felt like that was thrown in there because the director directed some other movie involving juvenile delinquents, and he felt like he had to throw that into the movie. It leads to a lot of aspects of the script just feeling like it's just a ton of padding, a ton of things that are just tossed in there to extend the runtime and not necessarily expand upon the width, or the scope, or the overall, um, let's just say, size of the script in terms of all the various different places it can go. Like, it's just one of those things where it's limited, and it's kind of disappointing in that regard, because when it comes to the stuff with the blob, it's fun and it's actually kind of creepy. But then when it comes to the scenes involving anything else, it's pretty flat, it's pretty boring, it's pretty lifeless, and it's just nowhere near as entertaining to watch. Like, even the drag racing stuff doesn't do anything for me. Um, and it makes so the finale isn't really as exciting as it could be because it just feels like it's a little too late. Like it's one of those things where okay, yeah, the blob it forms itself over the diner, and Steve and Jane, they're trapped in there, and they have to try to find a way to get out of there while the blob is closing in. That's where they find out about its weakness, which is cold, and they enlist the help of teenagers and the police to get all these fire extinguishers and freeze it, and then they they call the army, and the army picks it up and drops it in the Arctic, and that's the end of the movie. And I will give the script some credit for some other elements of it. The idea of having the teenagers help out, that was inspired, especially for the time. It seems like something that nowadays is just commonplace, but back in 1958, that wasn't really something you saw as much of. So that was a rather novel concept, an idea for the overall story to have the teenagers not just be a bunch of delinquents, have them actually be involved in a positive way when it comes to them helping and getting the fire extinguishers and using the fire extinguishers on the blob and doing their part to freeze it and stop its reign of terror. But other than that, I can't really say that there's a whole lot else about the film that really works. Other than, the opening scene with the blob where it's a meteor that falls out of the sky, and then the old hobo finds it, and the scenes that showcase the blob uh inside the meteor, and it crawling up the guy's arm, and the slow build. I do feel the script is effective in that regard as well. But yeah, it's just one of those scripts where you have all these different writers. Specifically, yeah, there's two writers, and they don't really come up with that much of a script. And I think honestly, that's kind of what a lot of films around this time were. A lot of them were gimmicks. A lot of them were more about the gimmick and more about the creature than anything else. There's not a whole lot of depth. There's not really a whole lot to the characters. And that's another reason why I'm not super big on a lot of films from this era, is because a lot of it is very heavily focused on elements that I feel really need stronger characters and need a stronger plot overall to make these creatures and to make these monsters and to make the horror really resonate and really stick with you. But as it is, it just kind of slides off, and it just sloughs off and isn't really as adhesive as it could be. Um, the cast, other than a relatively young Steve McQueen as Steve Andrews, is really not that great either. And even Steve McQueen at times, his acting is pretty bad. It's kind of crazy. It's not kind of, it is crazy. It is pretty nuts to see this film for the first time and just see Steve McQueen just be the complete opposite of what his cinematic persona is known to be by many. He's known to be the cool, suave, um, leading man. Like he's known to be a guy who is just as cool as ice, and like the epitome of a man's man. And in this, he's kind of a dweeb at times. He's kind of a dork. Like he's trying to be tough, but it doesn't really come across that way, and it doesn't come across in a way that is, let's just say, that believable. And it's crazy because it's Steve McQueen. Like that what he would do later on with films like Bullet and so on. And to just see him in this and just see him be just a complete antithesis to what his on-screen persona would eventually turn into, it's quite an interesting experience, so to speak. And you could see glimmers of that persona here. And that's why he's the best performer in it, because he still has that Steve McQueen charisma from time to time. Uh, I can't really say that anyone else has the same level of charisma or charm when it comes to their performance. I mean, Aneta Corseaut as Jane Martin, just a pretty mediocre at best performance by that actress. I didn't really feel she had the best chemistry with Steve McQueen either, which didn't help the scenes between the two. Um, Earl Rowe is as Dave Barton, more just average, run of the mill acting. Olin Howland as the old man, not in the film a lot, so he does the best that he can with what he little that he has to work with on screen, and he plays a good old hobo. Given that, Stephen Chase is Dr. T. Hallen. Um, that was a pretty just their performance for me. Same thing for John Benson as Sergeant Jim Burt, or George Karras as Officer Richie, or pretty much everyone else in the cast, like the other teenagers, some of the other people who are involved with the film in terms of working at the movie theater, like the projectionist guy. Um, the teenagers like Robert Fields as Tony, and James Bonnet as Mooch, and Anthony Frank as Al, and Pamela Karan, um, Josh Randolph, like just very just run of the mill, average, just kind of been there, done that. Nothing that impressive performances. I'm not going to say that they're terrible or they're visibly bad most of the time. No, for the time period, the acting is adequate enough, but a lot of these other characters, they're just written in a way that's just so paper thin, or just in a way that's pretty boring. So other than Steve, there's not really a lot of characters to root for or to really care about. So it makes the horror scenes in the film with the Blob less scary, less impactful. And the Blob, I think, is a prime example of a movie that it works okay for what it is, but it could be a lot better if it just had better writing, specifically when it comes to the characters and the plot in general. Because you can have a better cast with more capable actors other than Steve McQueen, and you would still get the same results because of just how weak and just not nearly as effective the script is as a whole. The cinematography by Thomas E. Spalding has some nice looking shots at times, especially the stuff that happens in the movie theater, or the run out scene, or the sequence that essentially opens the film with the old man and the meteorite. The editing by Alfred Hillman, I think, is pretty good. I'll give the editor a lot of credit, because a lot of the Blob scenes work as well as they do because, in large part, due to the editing. Because the editing is punchy, the editing adds a little extra bit of intensity or weight to those scenes, and definitely adds a little more energy. And it really does help in terms of just really getting the most out of the Blob sequences. The music by Ralph Carmichael, Burt Bacharach, and Mac David, who did the theme song. Um, it's not what I would say a score that is particularly special overall. It's very reminiscent of the typical sort of music that you would hear for films like this around the time of the film's release in the late 50s. But the main theme, Beware the Blob, that Burt Bacharach helped with, it doesn't necessarily evoke any sort of visions of horror, but it's a catchy tune. You know, did it, 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 did it. Beware of the blob, ba 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 ba. You know, it is a catchy tune. It's a rather jaunty tune, and I definitely do feel it's one of the more memorable and fun aspects of the film, other than the sequences involving the blob oozing around. It also does help that it's only 86 minutes. That's with the end credits. You take the end credits out, it's like only 82. So that is something that helps the movie. And even says up here it's 82 minutes. But if you look at some of the other listings for the film, it's actually a little longer, which I thought was interesting because it said that it was like 86, but here it says it's 82. Maybe I just looked at the wrong listing. But yeah, it's not a very long film at all. So it goes by at a relatively quick pace. And I would say if you enjoy these type of B movies from this time period, it's definitely worth a watch because I think there's a lot that you could potentially get out of it. But if you're not a super big fan of this style of filmmaking or this era of filmmaking, I don't really think you're missing a whole lot if you skip the Blob. I really don't, because what you're missing is just a few sequences involving the Blob that are kind of fun, but you're also missing a lot of plotting, boring scenes that are heavy in dialogue and are just heavily focused on anything other than the Blob. So, yeah, it's just one of those movies where I think nostalgia comes into play for some when it comes to their the way that they look at this film. I really do feel that way. Because you can't tell me that the scenes with the cops being skeptical or the stuff with the parents is really that compelling or that fun to watch. And it's not like the movie is just nonstop scenes of the Blob oozing around and eating people. That's not really the case at all. So it's one of those movies where I think the concept and the idea of it is what has resonated with people after all these years. It's not necessarily anything else, including Steve McQueen's performance as the leading man, because he went on to do way better performances after he did this film. But yeah, I still would say that I didn't mind it as a time waster. It was okay. It was so serviceable, uh mediocre entertainment in a B movie vein. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of The Blob, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.